Hey folks, it's Eric Lavallée for IndieSponge. We just got the results for the TIFF's 2020 People Choice Award winner, Kevin Jagernauth. Are you surprised or not surprised by who they identified?
Nomadland won the People's Choice Award, and I think I would have been more surprised if it didn't. If it didn't win, it has. There's no doubt about it. Like, this film is the one to beat. It's emerged as the front runner for everything, whatever awards are coming out this year. It's a huge win. It's a huge win for Chloe Zhao. I am not surprised, but it's great news for the film and for the filmmaker.
So what they do is they announce like a first runner-up. It's sort of like a little derby that they have going on. Regina King placed second, if you want to call it that way. And that says a lot about this film. And it also says a lot about the film that didn't place second, which is Ammonite. So Amazon have themselves a true contender here. They haven't pegged it with a launch or release date. Do you expect this? Do you expect to see this before the end of December, before the holidays, or do you think they might wait it out and try to place it in January, February, and try to keep that momentum going a little bit later in the game?
I think so. We're talking about One Night in Miami, and I think they might wait maybe until the early new year because it was just announced that Steve McQueen's films are hitting Amazon in November, and they're going to release one per week. So I would imagine they're going to want to wait for that cycle to finish before putting One Night in Miami out into the world. I think they'll wait a bit, maybe see, how the fall plays out. If there's any other, maybe AFI happens. I don't know. Maybe they send it there. So I think they're going to strategize a bit about where they place it, but I would predict maybe early next year.
That's a really good point that you bring up for Steve McQueen's films. We'll briefly touch on what's happening at the New York Film Fest. But yeah, TIFF ended essentially yesterday. And there's a whole bunch of titles that sort of had a great exposure. One of them is Limbo. Another one's Beginning, that feature film debut that we were sort of like following from, it was including Cannes, and we weren't really sure what the DNA was for this film, but it also was an award winner at TIFF, winning the Fabrizi Prize, which for me is a big deal. It's the critical establishment that go from festival to festival, and they sort of like they pick the South Korean films, or they'll pick the films that are slightly more arty, and so that says a lot about Beginning. And for the docu-films, 76 Days actually fared pretty well at TIFF. Do you have any other films that sort of like that you feel as it broke out at TIFF?
No, I think you highlighted a lot of them. I think the things that stand out are the films that maybe didn't catch on, like Ammonite, as you said. That came into the festival season with a ton of buzz and kind of fizzled out really quickly. I'm a bit surprised that the TIFF Midnight Madness winner is Shadow in the Cloud, which by all accounts is horrible. Like every review I've read has, almost all of them have just, it's critically roasted. So I'm a bit shocked at that. And I think, the docu-films, you're right. I think MLK FBI broke out as well. I think that got a lot of traction, a lot of buzz. I think my biggest takeaway is that this is a year, because of the smaller lineup, that a lot of critics were checking out the smaller films. And I hope it's a habit that continues, if we get back to a full festival next year, that these smaller films that ordinarily would get looked over still get the attention I think they deserve. I think it's been a good moment for these films to shine a bit where they maybe wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, the world cinema buffet certainly got everybody ate the green jello this year, and we did see a lot of different films get traction. Violation one. There's a film.
Oh, The Disciple. We can't forget about that. That's been getting a lot of traction. Yeah.
That picked up an award as well. And yeah, the the what's the sorry what's the midnight screening film that you just mentioned?
Oh, Shadow in the Clouds.
That Only Clouds got actually
Yeah.
got picked up, and so did Good Joe Bell.
Yeah.
So Solstice Studios, who wanted to be the first ones out of gates this summer with Unhinged, they landed the rights for this film. It got sort of roasted as well, sort of like a mixed
Sort of
review,
a mixed bag. Yeah.
and that got picked up for 20 million. So the Solstice Studios folks see some potential critical glam to this title, and perhaps this is their horse in the awards race.
I think it will be. It'll be something to like maybe mix up the acting categories a bit. But we'll see. Like you said, the notices were kind of in the middle. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. But 20 million, nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty big price tag.
Yeah, you're right about that. So San Sebastian essentially is starting as we speak. A lot of carryover titles that were essentially part of the Cannes label thing and part of TIFF are headed that way. But I think for us, the major new launch is the Lovers Rock film, Steve McQueen's film, just under 70 minutes. I think was a perfect way to begin the New York Film Fest. I heard about some people that were able to watch it at home actually dance while they were watching the film, sort of like a monsoon wedding, Mironeer style in 2001. So yeah, I get a sense that these are going to be important films as part of a larger conversation, not only awards, but Steve McQueen's touching upon a lot of great points right now that feel relevant.
Yeah, I mean, his whole series of films, is tracking through the West Indian community during a very pivotal time in British history. And, Lovers Rock, when those reviews came out and on Twitter, everyone just fell in love with that film immediately. And it seems like, I mean, it's very promising. It's Steve McQueen's an exciting filmmaker anytime he has something new, but the fact that we're going to have 5 films essentially from him to dive into before the end of the year is, in a year that hasn't given us much, that is a nice way to end it. That's a nice way to wrap it up for sure. So yeah, I'm very curious to see he has 2 films at New York. I think the other one's closing the festival. I think Mangrove.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to see what the notices are on that, and I'm glad we don't have to wait too long to watch them ourselves.
So let's hit some trade news. Michael Grandage is adapting, it's a book to film project called My Policeman. It was mentioned this week that Lily James and Harry Styles are both going to be on board this project. It's going to be 3 characters. So yeah, the first thought that I once like reading into the project, I got a sense it's something like Far From Heaven, and sort of a call back to an era where you couldn't assert yourself, at least in terms of your sexuality, and sort of like a last breath portion where like we're looking back at a love story that really had a strong effect on the character set. So yeah, let's briefly touch upon this filmmaker, this project. Grandage, this is his sophomore feature. He did a film called Genius that was at the Berlin Film Festival in 2016. So yeah, let's look at the cosmetics of the film.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a fascinating story with an interesting cast as well. So it takes place in the 90s, and a couple welcomes a friend back into their home, and then there's just like a reminisce about Patrick and Tom who had this relationship 40 years earlier when it was illegal. And so it's based on a book. And apparently the book is based on the true story of author Ian Forster, who had a similar relationship with a man that he kept in the closet. What this brought to mind for me was actually Ian Forster wrote a novella called Maurice, which is a very similar story. It's about two young men who are in love, but they can't. It sort of falls apart because of societal pressures, and that was made into a film
Mm-hmm.
by James Ivory. So it actually the premise reminds me of that, like that sort of um, relationship, that sort of, I guess, texture, the sort of narrative. Yeah, that's what it brought to mind for me.
You can't help but think of James Ivory since he's he's sort of like adapted those type of works, and certainly like it's set in 1950s Brighton, and so you could sort of like see like two creative or different like splintered narratives and how they might be dressed. And I certainly have a thing for anything that's of a different era, the 40s, 50s. Lily James is coming off Rebecca, so that sort of like gives
Mhm.
us a sense of what she can bring to the character. For Harry Styles, we don't know actually if he's going to be playing the object of desire or the person that's on the outskirts in a way. Um,
Mm.
so this is set up for a 2021 summer shoot. So it's something that we could potentially see in 2022. Is there anything else that we could say about this project?
Well, I think Harry Styles is the wild card here. We know he had a small role in Dunkirk, and now, I mean, he's kind of busy signing up for films. Last week we talked about him joining Olivia Wilde's film, and now he has this. It'll be interesting to see what the results are of his foray into acting and taking supporting and leading roles. So I'm just curious to see what he brings because we don't. It's really an unknown.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the filmmaker works, he's somebody who's more familiar with the stage. So I think perhaps a piece like this will work better in his favor than his a directorial debut. Isaac Chung is attached to his very first studio project, Bad Robot, for Paramount. A project that sort of like went from one scribe to the next. I think there's some interesting threads, some things to say there. But yeah, for Lee, he broke out big this year with Minari at the Sundance Film Festival. Won the two big awards, the Audience Award and the U.S. Dramatic Competition Award, the Grand Jury Prize there. A filmmaker that appeared in Cannes is like I think in the early noughts and sort of make a couple features, but this really was a breakout year for him. Um, and right now, his film, I believe that it was A24 is supposed to release um, Minari during the summer. That was delayed because of COVID. It's been programmed at Hamptons. It played at Deauville, so I think this trade news is sort of like is coming out at the same time where he's sort of going to get back into a press tour. And I'm not really sure what the A24 plans are with this feature, but this is easily, Minari is really much a film that'll be spoken about at the Indie Spirit Awards, and it does have potential Oscar buzz going with it. So let's dig into Bad Robot, which is a significant big deal for him. I believe he's adapting or working from a screenplay by another scribe. So let's talk about Bad Robot, which is a Japanese anime adaptation.
So actually, just to clarify, the film is actually Your Name,
Oh, yeah,
Bad Robot.
sorry, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, the film is Your Name, but it's being produced through J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot at Paramount. So I actually loved Your Name. It's a really amazing, touching, like imaginative film. It was kind of like a hit when it came out in 2016, and did well here actually in North America as well. It had a strong following. And they've been toying with the English language remake for a while, as you mentioned. It has a few versions of the scripts. Like one was written by Eric Hesserer, who wrote Arrival. Emily V. Gordon of The Big Sick did a pass, and that's the draft that Lee Isaac Chung will work off of here.
Hmm.
I mean, it's good for him. I mean, as you mentioned, I think he debuted at Cannes in 2007, so it's been a long journey for him. He hasn't made a ton of features. I think Minari might be his third, maybe.
Third or fourth.
Um, third or fourth, yeah, exactly. So this is a huge step for the filmmaker. My concern is I just don't see how this works as a live action film. Like the story is about, teenagers swapping bodies. There's like a sort of like fantastical magical element that in anime perfectly fine. Like it works really well because it's easier to sort of step into that world. I don't know. The idea of seeing that live action without it compromising the material a bit, we'll see. But all that said, if he has a really cool way into the material, then yeah, I'm intrigued. But it's with a little bit of caution. That's all.
I think for me, the major thing that could work for him is Emily V. Gordon's draft of this. Perhaps adding a sort of like, a variance of colors in the way characters might interact with one another. Because when I see a switch out of bodies narrative, I'm thinking back to like films I saw in the 80s, and that doesn't really do anything for me. So I'm hoping that the sensitivity that he brought in Minari really is like a touching family drama piece, sort of like configures how these two young protagonists might come across on the screen. But yeah, with the fantastical elements, I'm not really certain as to how that's going to play out. So proceed with caution, I think.
Exactly.
Paulo Sorrento, Hand of God, Toni Servillo, Netflix, a project that just screams out joy. So this week, production began in his native homeland, and this project is actually quite interesting. I love the title because it references two aspects. So what I wanted to discuss with you is how does Toni Servillo serve the storyline, and sort of like your expectations for a filmmaker that does have hits and miss, but when he does go into his offlandish worlds, I get a sense that there's a lot of fun to be had.
Yeah. So Hand of God. I mean, listen, Toni Servillo and Apel Sorrentino, as we both know, they are like hand in glove. Whenever there's a moment for them to work together, they do. I think this will be their fifth film together. They just came off the Loro, which at least in the European version is two films. I think it's cut into one for North America. So yeah, that's exciting. I mean, they'll have their creative groove going. As for the film itself, they're keeping the details cagey. They're not saying too much.
Mm-hmm.
But most people are speculating that it's going to be based on the director's real life. He was supposed to take a trip with his parents somewhere when he was a teenager. He stayed home to watch Maradona play on TV, and his parents died in an accident, and he was fine. It's interesting. Diego Maradona did threaten to sue over the name of the film, I think, earlier this year. I guess he got over it, or maybe they gave him some money. But this is cool. I mean, listen, I think Thierry Frémaux is probably rubbing his hands together right now, sending some emails and saying 2021. And I mean, like he's already got a stacked list of films to choose from. But what's one more? Why not?
It's crazy, but this is a Netflix deal. So, and seeing that he's Italian, we might see it more play out at Venice. But
You're right.
So the take on the Hand of God is that we get a sense that somehow the higher being above somewhat had a hand in him surviving, I guess, in a way, because his parents perished at a very young age. He was only 16 years old, but also it is in reference to a famous goal where Diego Maradona put out a hand and to score like
Yeah.
a celebrated goal. So I love the idea of the play on words here. Um, and I can only speculate that if he does use anything, it's going to be part of like an old television set on the side, and we might see some footage there, but maybe a jersey or something on the side.
Mm.
But yeah, Maradona doesn't have much say into this project. So he might be jumping the gun there. And for Servillo, I always appreciate him. I like the great El Divo in 2008 was a major discovery for me. And even though it talked about a lot of things that are very, if you live in Italy, you would get the system and you would get this true story. I got a sense of, okay, well, this is how that corrupt system works. And I remember being really finding a lot to appreciate on that film back in Cannes 2008. So yeah, the elements are in place, and I think that the fact that the backdrop might be really put in the forefront as well might do a lot, just to be, you know, I'll be romanced by all the elements that we find here. Speaking of Argentina, we now move to a project that will be set in Buenos Aires. So, as I mentioned, San Sebastian is about to begin, or has begun, and they have a lot of market things. They have co-production elements there, and one project that really sticks out for me, got like some nice exposure and variety, is Benjamin Naishtat, who I had the chance to interview back in Marrakesh for a film called Rojo, Rojo, and that actually had got a lot of critical buzz after it played at Venice. It also competed in TIFF's platform section, I believe it was 2 years back. And for this filmmaker, it's actually something that digs into the past. It's a book to film adaptation. So let's sink our teeth into Pobres Pibes, which means poor kids, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a filmmaker that I think you probably know a bit more about than I do. I haven't seen Rojo yet. I do remember you raving to me about it. You really liked it. But this seems like a production, a film that maybe won't be his breakout, but sort of takes him up one more level.
Yeah.
You know, this is a thriller, sort of set in the 20s, and yeah, I mean, I'll leave it to you, but I think this is the kind of film that we will keep, you know, in our notes, tracking it, seeing where it lands, you know, once it goes into production. And I think the major festivals will all be keeping an eye on it. We're all going to kind of want to see. I think it's going to be in demand for sure.
For sure. I appreciate, I don't know, I get a sense that whenever you grab material from the 20s or 30s and sort of like bringing it to the forward present and make a commentary out of it, I sort of find that sort of, it excites me. Sort of more or less what Paul Thomas Anderson did with Oil, like an old school novel. So just to like dig more into the project. So this takes place in Buenos Aires, and it's very much about a person that's sort of like stuck in a situation where he's out of funds, out of means, and he's sort of put in a catch-22 situation. And so it is thriller-esque, and I think Benjamin's a politicized filmmaker, and I think he's, as much as he's interested into culture and to literature and to current events, I think he's going to be able to do a mismatch with for him to really make a commentary on today's society and related to everything that we find in this book, and yeah, sort of like package not only a character study, but also a commentary on society, and do it with perhaps some more funds. If they're in San Sebastian, they're going to be looking towards Spain and other countries for co-production funding. So we can expect something that takes all the ambition and all the scope that we find in what is more or less a minimalist portrait, but still done with a beautiful production design value in El Rojo. And I look forward to you seeing it. It's actually still playing in local art house theaters a little bit across America. And so, yeah, I look forward to seeing who he casts as his lead protagonist, because in Rojo, he had these great male characters. And so, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to that. Moving along, Madonna is directing a biopic on Madonna. And that's being backed by Universal, being written by Diablo uh, um, uh, Cody.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your first reaction to Madonna taking creative license over her life story, which could span 5 decades? We're not certain at this point.
I think it's possibly the most Madonna thing she could possibly do. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I, I mean, we've had a run in recent memory, you know, with Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody and those kinds of things of movies about musicians being a huge deal. So there's that element. I think it's going to be something that here. I think here's the interesting quandary, I guess, of this movie is I'm sure Universal wants it to be the kind of movie that will do those kind of like major, you know, for everybody, everyone can go see the film. But I wonder if just how honest it will be and how objective about her own life Madonna can be in putting it on the screen, because she's had a lot, you know, her career has been, you know, provocative, controversial, groundbreaking as well on many levels. In addition to just being like one of the most successful pop stars of all time and one of the most groundbreaking songwriters of all time. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much, how deep it goes, I guess, is what I'm driving at.
Yeah, I'm hoping that she actually takes like huge creative chances here and actually plays with the idea of what Madonna is as a character, and not only relate some of the experiences that we'll want to see. I mean, like, I'd love to see all the work that she did before breaking out in like the early 80s. I'd love to see that aspect, but also see how she reinvented herself, and sort of like touch upon those things, but also perhaps do away with what we've seen in the recent in these recent features that you mentioned. So instead of checking off items off the list, why not play with the idea of that character, and I don't know, give us a fully fledged representation of things that we might not have known, or give us total make believe. I want her to sort of like stray away
Mm.
from that. Certainly, the what's going to be fun is that the music, the license, the hits, and all the music rights is a non-issue here.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think there's an opportunity here to play with the mythology of Madonna, of who she is, and what she represents. And you know, her career has taken her through so many different changes in styles, in fashion, in music, in culture. Like now that we're talking about it like this, you know, I can't help but think, you know, an I'm Not There kind of approach would be amazing. Like you have different actors playing her at different points in her career. You blend fact and fiction. You know, you almost make the movie as much of a myth or as much of a construct, or I guess if that's the right word to use, as her persona, as her career. I think that's a really cool opportunity. But again, like this is a major studio film. I, you know, Diablo Cody, who I think is a really good screenwriter, a really good filmmaker. But you know, she works in a certain style in a certain lane. So I'm I'm wary of just how many risks this film was going to take.
Well, knowing her, I believe that she might take a lot of chances and play with the play with the perception of what she was in a larger public. But I hope she gets into the nitty gritty of the creative process, because I mean, let's face it, she was a hit machine for a very long time, still is to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And to wrap up, Jake Gyllenhaal, Antoine, Fuqua, Bold Films as the production company. There's no studio attached yet. Jake and the Guilty filmmaker have really had a great bromance as of late. So the Guilty is going to be remade. That's not news per se, but the filmmaker that's on board sort of had great chemistry with Jake in a previous film. So let's talk about all these elements coming together and how it actually favors the sort of like production situation that we're in now, which is COVID, smaller sets, and maybe, you know, chamber pieces.
Yeah, so, you know, The Guilty was the single location, as we both know, single location thriller, which, you know, in a COVID time, it's great. You set up a camera and one actor, and away you go. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting. You know, Jake Gyllenhaal is making great choices, you know, for the past few years. He's just venturing and doing whatever he feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Antoine Fuqua, I'm far less excited about. Like, he's just like a Hollywood guy. Southpaw I actually didn't see at the time, but like, you know, I've seen enough of Antoine Fuqua's films that I feel like I know what I'm getting, and so I it's an interesting choice. I mean, I guess they're gonna make the movie, but his addition to it is interesting. The thing that I think I'm more interested in is that Nick Pizzolatto of True Detective fame wrote the script, so I'm kind of curious what he's taken from the original and what he's added or changed, or because he is a very particular writer. He likes sort of grimy crime stories, so I'm kind of curious where his stamp is on this material.
That's a really good point. The True Detective creator perhaps worked best with a large ensemble pieces, if you will. Obviously a larger canvas. So here it really is like, it's going to be one room setting. Production begins in November. It's set in Los Angeles. I don't know if that's worth pointing out. I don't know how much of the landscape we'll end up seeing, but potentially we'll be talking about this same time next year around TIFF time, especially since The Guilty has a lot of I want to call it art house cred, and I think Jake has a really good rapport with TIFF. So this is something that we could be talking about same time next year. So this is perhaps going to be Jake's next project, and he might actually follow this with Blind Snow. So that would make it 2 for 2 with the
Gustav Mahler.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it could be at TIFF, but you know, as you said, there's no studio attached, and I can only imagine everyone's circling. It's certainly the streamers. So this could be something that Netflix just throws a ton of money at, and we just see it, you know, sometime between now and 20 or in early 2021 or whatever.
Good point.
Yeah.
And that concludes another episode of IndieSponge. Thanks for watching films. Netflix, Antonio Campo's film. Sean Durkin's film just came out this week, The Nest, IFC. So support your local streamer or local art house theater when possible, and I'll see you next week. I'm Eric Lavallée. I'm editor-in-chief and site owner for IONCINEMA.com, and this is
Kevin Jagernauth, contributing writer for the playlist.
And together we are IndieSponge.